I want to take a bit of a step back because I talk a lot about stories, and I've just told you a little bit of my story and why I think it's important to tell you it. But I want to take a few serious steps back in terms of thinking about why stories work, why stories matter, and why we have this kind of moving stream of images in our head. Because if you think about it, what really makes humans different from all other animals on the planet, as far as we know? Well, in my opinion, it's not that we're kind of bigger. That we're not obviously not bigger or stronger than other animals. Well, in my opinion, we are the master collaborators, and actually, archaeology is starting to validate this. So, if you go back sort of 50,000 years, or actually maybe a bit further, when humans first arrived in Europe, and there was already another species of human here called Neanderthals, who were bigger than us. As far as we can see, the evidence suggests they were bigger than us, they were stronger than us. Um, but we survived and Neanderthals didn't. So I have some thoughts on that in a moment, but I think it's really to do with collaboration. So what underpins collaboration? Well, really it comes down to effective communication. If you want to collaborate with someone, if you want to work with someone, you have to communicate with them. You have to communicate your value. And really language and language selection is the basis of this. Um, so if you think about why, so when you're selecting the language to communicate what you do, um, the reason that stories work is because we have this ability to blend kind of past and future events, real or imagined, into a cohesive story. And that's how we really make decisions. It's the story that gets down to like the decision-making level of your brain, and then you have this kind of rational level of your brain that kind of justifies things afterwards with logic. So we have to select the right language. The words matter and the stories matter. If you get the story wrong, it's really like you keep hitting on it. It's like you keep hitting against a wall. People don't really get what you do because they don't get the story. They get the logic, but they don't get the story. So that's what a story allows you to do. It allows you to communicate your value, facilitate win-win arrangements. And, a story is really about symbolic thought. So when you were listening to my story before, you might have imagined me walking in off the street to a hair salon. You might have imagined me at the networking meeting. That's kind of the symbolic thought, and that's kind of the basis of how we build trust with people. So I think in terms of why tell stories. So I apologize if you already get all of this, but I really want to hammer home that this isn't really like, it's like you can't just tack on stories onto your marketing. It has to be like a core thing that you do. It's a core mode of communication that you have to commit to. And once you commit to it, it becomes a lot easier to communicate the transformation that you provide. So just going back to the Neanderthals and going back, pre-agriculture, I guess. This lion man, so this is a wood carving, this lion man here. This was found in a swamp in what is now modern day Slovakia. I'd like you to think in your head for a moment, when does this date from? I can tell you that this dates from around, so they've carbon dated this, it dates from around 33,000 BC, so 35,000 years old. So there's this kind of idea that pre-agriculture, that so the human species is about 100,000 years old, and agriculture happened about 10,000 BC. And there's this idea that pre-agriculture we lived in kind of like a nomadic, dog eats dog society. And actually this completely tells a different story. These people had time to make this level of art. And this is really, this is a type of symbolic thought. And actually, there were different lion sculptures found in different places 30 kilometers apart, which on foot is a very long way. So why would these people go to these lengths to produce this kind of art? And I think it's to do with communicating meaning, communicating a shared culture, shared identity for achieving things that are bigger than we can achieve by ourselves. And that, I think, is why humans have succeeded. At this time, what was, human survival was not assured by any stretch of the imagination. This statue was found at a place called Göbekli. I'm going to say this wrong. Göbekli in Turkey. So this dates to around 10,000 BC, which is around the time of the first hunter-gatherers, like the first fixed hunter-gatherer sites were found. But again, what this tells you is this was not made by a culture of people who were just really struggling for survival. And actually, symbolic thought and this level of art, so this level of art and storytelling, it's really been fundamental for human survival and passing on knowledge right through human existence. So when we talk about stories and marketing, this isn't some kind of new invention or anything like that. It's something that I think we need to relearn, and kind of not just tack onto our marketing, but actually make a core thing. I actually saw this artifact in northern Peru a few years ago on a trip that I made. It's called a quipu. It dates from about 1100 AD. We think it wasn't actually a headdress, but it's a bit of a grainy photo, but you can see that there's lots of little dots on this photo. So each strand contains different dots of different sizes and different spaces apart. And what we think is that this is actually, what we think now is that this records a history of the Chachapoyan people. We have now lost the ability to interpret that history, but we think it's almost like an equivalent source of writing. So again, it's symbolic thought. It symbolizes some kind of story, some kind of knowledge, and that was how the knowledge was being passed on. So when you think about it, when you're educating your customers, you're trying to pass on knowledge to them, and we're not doing anything different here. These drawings were found in a cave in France called Pech Merle. Dates from the last interglacial ice age, 27,000 years ago. So this we think is an auroch, which was the predecessor of the cow, which was the wild cow at the time. And again, this is symbolic expression. This was a very cold, very hard time, and yet these people found time to do these quite amazing paint drawings, dating from around the same time. We have this hand print on the cave, which we think was basically graffiti. We imagine that people would have done this for the same reason that we did this. It's to pass on a message. So if you don't learn anything about storytelling today, you'll learn a bit about history, I guess. But what I'm getting at here, and maybe what I'm starting to labour the point, is that symbolic thought predates language and it predates rational thought. Many things that we take for granted, at least in the West, come from the rationality of the Greeks, the Mesopotamians, the Assyrians, and other peoples post-agriculture, so post 10,000 BC-ish, which is when agriculture really started to take hold. And if you think about it, and I'm not saying by any stretch these are negative developments, but I think we need to acknowledge that all of these shape the way that we perceive the world, and we perceive the world in a very rational, very systematic, especially in the UK. We have a very order and cues are very important to us. The alphabet. If you divide all of the forms of human expression into 26 characters, that's a very rational way of viewing language. Mathematics was probably developed by the Babylonians. The meter was originally, I really like this actually. So the meter was originally defined in 1793 as 1/1,000,000th of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. So that really stems from the idea that the entire world is measurable. Everything we can measure, we can put into an equation, we can figure out. And actually, this is still how our school systems work. If you think about it, young children. So I've got a 6-month-old who isn't yet able to talk, but he's just about starting to babble. And I kind of think that young children are actually very good at telling stories, and we kind of lose that ability because we start to worry that when you're at school, we worry that we're going to be judged or graded. Heaven forbid, but school really perpetuates the idea that mathematics is everything, and rationality is how we figure things out. And we're starting to kind of learn now that isn't actually so true. Yes, it's important, and yes, huge strides in human development have been made from this, but it isn't the be all and end all. Especially when you start to do something that's quite unique, and you need to communicate that to people. You can't do it. You just can't do it with rational arguments. You just can't break through the noise. There's so much marketing noise, and you can't break through it by just relying on rational arguments. Even in terms of philosophy, what Socrates did was he turned rational thought inwards to solve moral dilemmas, which which actually was a great step forward, and it's enabled some of the Western values that we have today in terms of empowerment and responsibility. Um, but what I'm getting at is that stories predate all of this, and either you can run with the tide of stories. So we've got all these stories and these moving images running in our heads. You can leverage that, or you can ignore it, and it's far easier to leverage it. Just before we leave this section, I just want to stress that I do think we're in a changing time. So as I said earlier, the human species is about 100,000 years old. For 98% of that time, we lived in a hunter-gatherer tribe existence. 12,000 years ago now, we then shifted to agriculture. And then probably the next development from that. So actually, these changes came from my friend Derek Dearden, who pointed these out to me, and I think it's really actually profound in terms of big changes in how we structure society and how we live our lives. So agriculture, I think, was the first big change. City-states was probably the next one after that, which probably first came about 2000 BC. So this image here was a city called Harappa in what is now modern-day Pakistan, and actually we think that this basically died out because the river Indus changed its course. But what is interesting when you look at this photo is there's actually no big centers of so we don't think there's any obvious temples or kind of centers of power here. It looks like quite an egalitarian society, especially if you compare it to contemporary societies like the ancient Egyptians. So anyway, that's a bit of a side point. But the way that we construct our cities and the way that we construct our houses kind of reflects the way that we view the world. If you want to look into that a bit more. The next change came really with the scientific and industrial revolutions, which happened, a few hundred years ago. And I would argue that most work and actually marketing first came into this model in terms of mass production, the separation of ownership and control was very important. Capital was very important. You needed a lot of money to start a business. You probably needed a factory, a huge workforce. And that was really the last change. So then we're now in this changing time where the internet has suddenly appeared, and it's basically been like an implosion, I think. And we don't really, we've gone from talking about things that happened hundreds, well, maybe tens of thousands of years ago to something that has now been introduced, say, 20 years ago. And I think the implications are really only becoming apparent. So something that has stuck with me about this, and a really good thing to think about, is that, so this is called the Sinafin framework. And what it's meant to illustrate is that all of the tasks that you can do in your work can be categorized in these 4 quadrants. So on the right-hand side, these are known tasks. And then we've got the level of complexity going up here. So up until in the sort of industrial revolution model where most, really up until about 20 years ago, most jobs were quite known. Like people could ask you what you did. And so I live in Sheffield, and you could say, I work in steel. I work at the post office. I do this. I'm a plumber. I'm an engineer. So so the jobs are either simple or they're complicated, but they're known. You can create processes for them. You can build them out at scale. And I think what's happening now is the conventional jobs are basically drying up, and the opportunity to do something on the edge of the curve that hasn't really been done before, the opportunity to create something, blaze your own trail, has exponentially increased. And that's basically what I do in my work. I work from home. I help people tell better stories about their work. There isn't, I couldn't go to the job center and get that job. It just doesn't exist. I've had to create it. And actually, that's the situation we're now living in. And that's why really telling personal stories and communicating your transformation has become really, really important. And actually figuring out, well, to communicate your transformation, what is that story that you need to tell? What is that story that's going to sit at the core of your marketing? We've really got this communications challenge. We've gone from basically having artisans, so pre-industrial revolution, we've gone from having artisans where You didn't really travel anywhere. Everyone, you maybe sold to people in your local town. Everyone knew you. You basically didn't really need marketing, because you could just speak to people, and people knew what you did, and people knew that you were good, and you know, you, there was good word of mouth about you, and marketing was just basically not necessary. And then the railway came along and pushed back all of the boundaries. So this was a railway poster about the Yorkshire Dales, and actually, you could take your business and sit on a perilous, train journey for a few hours and go and sell your wares in a different town. You could open up, effectively a franchise in a different town. Suddenly that was possible by rail, but so the biggest developments really were the railways, the canals, and the telegraph, and that being a precursor for the internet. And we've now got this situation where as soon as you introduce more distance, so I can basically sell to anyone in the world, anyone with an internet connection can buy from me, but I have a huge communications problem. Um, so you're either what. So I've got this distinction from Richard Koch, who has a book called Simplify. Richard Koch is best known for his book, The 80/20 Principle. But what he says is that all successful businesses are either a price simplifier, like McDonald's, for example, who can churn out products very cheaply, much cheaper than anyone else, or you have to be a proposition simplifier, where you provide a result that is twice as good as anyone else, and that's what you have to get to. But in doing that, you have to communicate that result to people who don't know you, don't trust you, or maybe in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. That's the challenge that we face.